Good morning. Welcome to another edition of E.W. Jackson for America. Great to be with you again this morning. Well, we've got a lot to cover this morning, and so that I don't fail to do this, let me just mention right off the bat, Mike Johnson's in trouble again. This so-called continuing resolution, or this CR that he has passed, has got Republicans up in arms. The president has declared himself to be against it. Along with J.D. Vance, of course. And it appears that something is going to have to give, or there's going to be a shutdown of the government, which is probably not a bad thing. Because, look, either we pay the piper now, or we're going to pay the piper later. But there's been calls for the president's intervention, calls suggesting that Mike Johnson may not last as speaker. All he needs to lose apparently is one vote, and he loses one vote, and he could be toppled as speaker. So I wanted to get that out there because that's something I want to come back to and talk about in a little bit more detail, and exactly why he is getting the kind of opposition that he's getting right now. So let me not launch into it because I've got some things to say about Speaker Mike Johnson and that whole situation. But before I get to that, so I wanted to get that out there so that you wouldn't think I was ignoring that or hadn't thought about it or was not aware of it or whatever. But before I get to that, I like to talk about conceptual things that I think others have not talked about that you might find interesting to just discuss and think about. And this whole case against ABC got me thinking because apparently George Stephanopoulos is livid over this. He's humiliated having to apologize for having told a lie. I mean, my goodness gracious, it's bad enough to be caught telling a lie, but to actually have to apologize for the lie, I mean, that's beyond the pale. So he's upset. Chuck Todd is upset. Apparently, he says it's going to be very difficult to do one's job now. Oh, you mean that you might get sued for lying? Wow, yeah, that's a burden that is difficult to overcome. To actually, the notion that actually telling the truth is an important part of journalism. I mean, that's been thrown out the window for a long time. So why in the world would anybody hold us to that kind of standard? That's ridiculous. So apparently the left-wing media is all up in arms over this. And basically, once again, it proves, Donald Trump is a monster and Donald Trump, But it got me thinking about this. When they say these things about Donald Trump, he's Hitler, he's a fascist, he's a dictator, he's, you name it. Everything but a child of God. They never, ever, ever cite any factual basis for the claim. Ever. Now, if I'm wrong about that and you've heard them say something that you consider to be a factual basis and explains why they think the way they think, please let me know what it is. Because I've not heard anything that would suggest that. I mean, his offhand remark, I'm going to be a dictator for one day. Well, that's Donald Trump, the way he talks. Donald Trump has no aspirations to be dictator. But he likes to tweak the left. He likes to get under their skin. And he knows saying things like that will do that. And he knows his supporters look at that and say, we know. We know what he's doing. Because we've observed him long enough to understand him and to understand that's the way he is. That's the way he talks. That's what he does. It's his policies that really matter most to us, because we've learned the policies are what matter most to the country in terms of the well-being of the American people. But I had this insight. Occasionally I get these inspirations of the Holy Spirit. And it hit me why they call him these names without any factual basis for doing so, why they hate him so much. And I know that there's a big, broad question on that. I mean, there are a lot of things that factor into this, but here's the thing I want to focus in on. You know what they really hate about Donald Trump and what they hate about you and me? The thing that really gets them, that causes them to call us fascists, is the concept of putting America first. That is what it is. It is the concept of putting America first. The America First agenda. The notion that we're going to do what is in the best interest of America. We're going to put the interests of the American people ahead of everybody else, all foreigners, all illegal alien invaders, all adversaries. We're even going to hold our friends and allies to a standard like making them pay their fair share of NATO so that the burden is not put on America and the American taxpayer. We're going to do tariffs because we don't want our markets taken advantage of by people who are adversaries and our enemies. All of these things have to do with promoting the best interests of America. I love that. I've said biblically, the Bible says he that does not care for his own and does not care for his own household, which I consider the American family to be our household in the broader sense, has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. We have a responsibility to take care of our own country first. And you know what? It hit me for the first time this morning. That's what they truly hate about Donald Trump. Because these people are globalists and ultimately Marxists and communists with a small m and a small c. In other words, they wouldn't label themselves that way, but that's what frames their thinking. Those ideas, these collectivist ideas, these ideas of social justice, which again is nothing more than a euphemism for socialism. And I said that the real definition of social justice is tribal vengeance. That's really what it means. But these people are globalists and they're Marxists. You remember that the end result for communism is a one world government in which there are no borders and communism rules everything. That's communism's ultimate aim, their ultimate vision. And these people are globalists and Marxists, and therefore the notion of protecting and defending our borders and our sovereignty is anathema to them. And of course, Donald Trump is committed to that. You and I are committed to that. The notion of patriotism and loving our country and feeling a first duty to America is anathema to them because they don't feel that way. They really do not feel that way. They see America as just one little part in this broader grand vision that they have for the world. And somebody like Donald Trump comes along and expresses what I would consider to be nothing more than a common sense point of view, which is we must take care of our own country first. And he is the monster of monsters. He is horrible. Now, some of this, of course, is because, and please listen to this closely because it's going to sound like it's just an ad hominem, just it's kind of an insult, but it's not. It's not. Part of this is the result of these folks being so indoctrinated that they are incapable of making the distinctions that would allow them to see Donald Trump in proper perspective. So, I mean, part of it is just the mindset that they have, that they're very conscious of, but part of it is that they have been dumbed down by indoctrination so that they can't really analyze things in any kind of objective or factual way. Now, let me give you an example, because again, that sounds more conceptual than I want it to sound. But let me give you an example of what I mean. They compared Donald Trump to Hitler because, of course, Hitler was completely and totally committed to the supremacy of Germany, which meant the enslavement of the world. Hitler's understanding of the role of Germany was not just that Germany should do well in the world, but that Germany should control the world and enslave the world, and the world should be bowing at the feet of Germany. That was his vision. I mean, Hitler was a demonic megalomaniac. A man just, you can't go too far in expressing the degree to which he was completely and totally controlled by the devil. But they can't distinguish between that, which is just completely and totally pathological, and a man who says, I love my country and I want the best for America. Whoa, you're a fascist. Because they've been so indoctrinated with Marxist, socialist, collectivist, globalist thinking that the moment you say, I'm a patriot, I love America, I want to put America first, within the context of their warped minds now, their indoctrinated minds, they can't distinguish between that and Adolf Hitler or Mussolini. They really can't. Because their thinking has been warped to prevent them from seeing from acknowledging, understanding, perceiving any nuance. And this is not even nuance. I mean, this is one great big gaping wide chasm between one and the other. But they can't perceive that. Remember I told you about this reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch who was interviewing me one time, and he asked me, this was early on, Donald Trump, I think he had just been elected at that point. Had he been elected, or was he just, he might have been running, because I'm not sure. I think I was running for office at the time, and I'm not sure exactly which time that was, because I've run 3 times locally, and then, of course, ran for president one time. But I think it was my race for the Senate when Donald Trump was gearing up to run for re-election. I think that's what it was. But he asked me, he said, well, what is it you like so much about Donald Trump? And see, this is a reporter imbued with that mindset. So in his mind, Donald Trump's evil. Donald Trump's a fascist. How could you, a black man, like Donald Trump? And I said to him, well, the first thing I said is Donald Trump is a patriot, and he's setting a tone of patriotism, which I think the country desperately needs. And he said to me, I mean something real. See, so for him, the notion of patriotism and loving one's country is not real. It's not something to be acknowledged. It's not. You see what I'm getting at? It's not something that matters, because from his indoctrinated perspective, that is simply propaganda to try to get people to, I guess, have some kind of hatred for the other people of the world, while hypnotizing, mesmerizing, blinding people to the fact that you're only using that to try to set up some kind of dictatorship or what. I mean, yeah, it doesn't make a bit of sense to us, but it does to them. Because once the mind is warped with indoctrination, once you join the cult, so to speak, when someone comes to you with common sense and says to you, wait a minute, what you're doing is wrong, it doesn't make sense, you think, no, you're the unenlightened one. You don't make sense. Because it really is, on one level, it is a kind of mental illness. On one level, where the mind is warped and the ability to perceive reality is diminished, if not destroyed. And I've analogized this to cult-like thinking many times, but I really wanted to get to this point of, from their perspective, patriotism, putting America first, they see that as terrible, fascist, hateful. I mean, That's the way they perceive Donald Trump, and that's the way they perceive all of us patriots who love our country. Now, I've used this analogy before. I said it's as if they're saying, if I say, hey, listen, I've got to make sure that my yard is clean. I've got to make sure that my house is well kept. I've got to make sure that my property has the necessary repairs and improvements and things that are going to keep it looking good and keep me and my family comfortable and so forth. And somebody says, whoa, what are you saying? You hate your neighbor? And you think, what? I'm not responsible for my neighbor. I mean, other than being a good neighbor and obviously being a friend. I mean, I've got neighbors. I care about them. If they needed help, I'd be happy to help them. But I'm not responsible for their property. I'm responsible for my own. Now, if they ask for my help and I can help them, I certainly will. But I'm not going to allow my property to be diminished or destroyed because I'm busy helping somebody else. Yeah, the Jackson property first. Now, anybody with common sense would say, well, yeah, that makes sense. But when you apply that on the national level, it'd be, it's dangerous. You people are haters. So when we talk about our sovereignty and the security of our borders, they're hearing fascism, xenophobia, because they look at all of that from a one world perspective, a globalist perspective. And so then they have to characterize it, right? In order to show how evil it is. These people are racist. They're anti-Hispanic. They're this, they're that. They're horrible. We've got to set up sanctuary cities and states in order to protect our neighbor who wants to come and live on our property. I mean, because you could take the analogy there. So my neighbor decides to move into my house. And I say, well, you've got to go. Now, in a situation like that, unless it's a break-in or a robbery, you can't use self-help. You can't shoot somebody. You got to call the authorities, and you got to handle it. You got to handle it in a way that demonstrates adherence to the rule of law. But if I say they've got to go, and somebody said to me, well, what kind of neighbor are you? What are you? An anti-neighbor person? No, but they don't have a right to live on my property because they didn't pay for it. They don't own it. I do. Oh, now see, obviously you are neighbor phobic. Obviously you are some kind of anti-neighbor racist or anti-neighborist. I mean, because the perspective from which a person would see that, if their minds are warped by indoctrination, I'm the evil one because I am trying to protect and defend what is mine. And the very doing that and expressing that is in and of itself, for the person with this warped perspective, hateful and evil. Because if I were really a good person and my neighbors moved into my property and decided they were going to live there, I would simply say, well, what room can I live in? I'm not going to be a mean, hateful person and just kick you out. Where can I live? What rooms would you like to take over? And then they say, oh, well, now you see, now you're a good person. Yeah, you are a good person. So just like that idiot reporter telling J.D. Vance, no, now wait a minute, Tren de Aragua, they only took over a handful of buildings in Aurora. But, they only took over a handful of buildings in Aurora. And J.D. Vance says, right, Lee, do you hear yourself? It's a handful today. So it's like the neighbor saying, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to be good to you. we're only going to live in 2 rooms of your house, okay? Wow, thank you so much. Thank you. And then they say, later on, they say, but you know what? We're going to need a 3rd room. And then a 4th. And before you know it, am I allowed in? We'll let you know when we want you in. You just sit out in the driveway and we'll let you know when you're allowed in. Oh, okay. I mean, I know it's an absurd example, but really to me, it captures the illogic of these people. But when you understand where they're coming from, now okay. Because imagine the perspective of a person who says, but you shouldn't own any property. You have a right to own that property. So when a neighbor or an illegal alien or anybody moves into your property, you shouldn't have anything to say, because after all, early Americans stole it from the Native Americans, and capitalists use it, and going down the road. Now you inherited, but you're part of that whole scheme, that whole chain of evil. So somebody moves into your property, you ought to just say, you know what? I don't deserve it anyway, because in the end, it was really stolen from other people. And if they don't let you in, you ought to be just to accept that as reparations for the wrongs that were done that allowed you to own that property. I mean, that's the mindset, folks. And in that context, you and I and Donald Trump are a bunch of fascists and bigots and racists and haters and all of this, because these people are so cult indoctrinated in their thinking that they are unable to understand the common sense notion that we're supposed to take care of our own first. And that's all it is. I've said repeatedly, I don't hate the Chinese people. I do hate communism. And I hate the communist system that has the Chinese people enslaved to it. I do hate that, because it's a false way. And the Bible instructs us we're supposed to hate every false way. Psalm 119, 104, and 128. Check it out. Second Thessalonians, First Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9. Check it out. The failure to love the truth and to hate falsehood is what leads people into bondage. Because Jesus said you shall know the truth shall make you free. Well, that means if what you know are lies, those lies shall keep you in bondage. Put you and keep you in bondage. And so the left is really, and they don't realize it, but they're in bondage to Satan. I wanted to share that with you because it helps us understand what we're up against. This stuff is deep in them. And that's why I say politics is part of the answer, but it is not the answer. Because the answer is really a spiritual awakening. The answer is really revival. The answer is a third great awakening that awakens the American people to the degree to which we have been hoodwinked, misled, deceived, miseducated, indoctrinated, you name it, into believing stuff that doesn't make a bit of sense. Not a bit. This is how you saw the hearings yesterday of the president of the NCAA trying to justify allowing men to go into female locker rooms and restrooms and display their male genitalia and on the basis that they're claiming to be women, and how he was justifying all that. Now, my father used to call these people educated fools. Now, here's a man who is clearly well educated and is just as dumb as a rock. And he simply could not understand suggesting that men, biological men, ought to be kept out of the female areas that require their privacy. And he said, oh, well, the women can find someplace else to carry out their business. What? So the female athlete can't go into her own locker room, can't go into her own restroom, can't go into her own shower. She's got to find someplace else to do her business because some guy wants to be in there. And they think he thought that was perfectly okay. That was perfectly just. I know that has nothing to do with I mean, the point is when you are indoctrinated with a certain perspective and you have a cult-like devotion to that, that viewpoint, when assailed with logic and facts, is irrationally defended no matter what anybody says. That's the bottom line. I was going to use an example earlier to say some child gets involved in a cult. And of course, the cults always try to separate children from their parents, just like the left is trying to do that with all of this gender indoctrination nonsense and all the nonsense that they're spewing into them in these government schools and these universities and colleges that are nothing more than indoctrination camps. But some kid joins a cult, and the cult tries to separate them from their parents, and the kid, of course, buys into it, and the parents finally have an opportunity to interact with the child, and they say to the child, "Why are you allowing them to separate you from us?" And the child says, "They're not separating me from you. You're separating me from you by refusing to come into the truth." And here's the child's got flat affect, because their brains have been turned into mush. So the affect is flat, and there's no emotion, no commitment, no connection to their own family anymore. And it's not because the cult has indoctrinated the person. The person saying, no, it's because you all won't come into the truth. And I cannot be associated with you. And here's the family weeping and crying and pleading and begging, and the child's looking at her with a blank stare, and turns and walks away. And goes back to the cult, and the cult says, unfortunately, they don't get it, do they? Unfortunately, they're just not enlightened like we are. They're just, well, we certainly wish they could come into the full understanding that we have, but they don't. So in the meantime, we just have to discard them. It's really the same thing. The logic, facts, assailing the indoctrination of the cult member is only confirmation for the cult member of how right they are and how wrong their parents are. You see what I'm getting at? So that's why you and I are being labeled fascists and bigots and haters and racists and this, because these people are so indoctrinated that the logic, the facts, the common sense that we bring to bear on the issues are nothing for them but confirmation of the fact that they are right and we are wrong. That's why they never, ever, ever say Donald Trump's a fascist and here's why. Ever. They just call him the name. Because those of us would say, well, prove it. And I think Donald Trump's a patriot who loves this country and is trying to serve us. And Donald Trump's one of the greatest presidents this nation's ever had. And I can prove it by what he did with the economy. I can prove it by what he did with closing down the border. I can prove it by the improvement of life in minority communities around this country. I can prove it by his holding our adversaries accountable and by his requiring that our allies step up and pay their full share of whatever mutual defense agreements we have, like NATO. I can prove what Donald Trump represents. Now, you say he's a fascist. Prove that to me. Oh, you just don't understand. Where are the facts? Where's the logic? Where's the rationale? No, you don't understand. You just don't get it. So that's where we are. And that has not changed as a result of the election. That's why I say this is not merely a political battle, because an election cannot change the consciousness of people. Now, thank God there are people who are waking up. Okay, there are people who are getting it. There are people who are saying, you know what? All these big tech people showing up at Mar-a-Lago, to me, is an admission on their part, not that they like Donald Trump, because I don't believe that they do, because I think these people are confirmed leftists. But it's an admission on their part that while they do not agree with him, Donald Trump's not Adolf Hitler. Donald Trump's not a fascist. Donald Trump is a president with whom they disagree, but a president who they don't want to have as an adversary, because the man is pretty powerful. And I'm not talking about the power of his governmental role. I'm talking about the power of his movement and his influence, because right now Donald Trump, for all practical purposes, is being treated like president of the United States, but he's not. He won't be until January 20th. But his influence, his power is undeniable. And it is a power that has been given to him by the American people in that vote, and by his supporters all over the country, who, generally speaking, agree with the direction in which he wants to lead the country. And I said generally speaking, because I think I mentioned yesterday, there's some areas I don't agree with Donald Trump on, and I'm going to speak up about them when I feel it's necessary. It's one of the reasons why I decided not to pursue any kind of appointment with the administration, because I want to be a fair arbiter. I want to be free to say whatever I think, and not feel like I have to be muzzled because I work for the administration. I want good, strong Christian conservatives working for Donald Trump, and if there's any way in which I can help make sure that happens, I'm going to be happy to do it. It's just, I just don't believe it's for me. I believe my role is to be here talking to you. I believe that's what God has called me to. One of my spiritual sons called me and told me that a possible judgeship was available, and asked me what I thought. I said, well, I don't believe it's for you, only because I know how outspoken you are. And as a judge, you can't be outspoken. You're muzzled. You can't get involved in the issues of the day. You can't get involved in the politics of the day. You cannot do that. It changes the whole nature of your being. Now, if that's what you want, and some people really, they adhere to that. They love that. That's it suits them. It fits them. Doesn't suit me or fit me. And anybody like me, it wouldn't suit or fit. So, but my point is, to get back to the point, it doesn't mean I agree. The fact that I support Donald Trump doesn't mean I agree with everything he says or does. And I think probably most of his supporters feel the same way. I can't tell you how many people said to me, oh, well, I wish he hadn't said that. You know? But we also know, as I've said many times, for me, the bottom line is the very thing that the left hates about him is the thing that I love about him, which is I truly believe that this man loves this country, cares deeply about the well-being of the American people, and is going to do everything in his power within the framework of our constitutional republic to see to it that you and I have the best life we can have within the context of freedom. I don't believe Donald Trump is in the business of trying to guarantee that for anybody, but I think he's in the business of trying to make sure that everybody has access to the opportunities that allow us to live a better life. And he will oppose those things that he believes get in the way of that. So, just wanted to share that with you. Now, back to Mike Johnson, and I'll see if I can get to a couple of other issues in the meantime before we have to go. I was elated when Mike Johnson was elected speaker, because I know from people who know him, he's another one of these people. I don't know President Trump, but I know people who do know him. And I know what they tell me from firsthand knowledge and interaction with him. And I don't know Mike Johnson, but I know people who do know Mike Johnson and have firsthand interaction and knowledge of him. But I immediately liked the guy because I thought, man, he's a born again believer. He's a man of faith. This is going to be great. And shortly thereafter, I immediately began to have questions. And now we've got a big question looming because he is basically pushing a CR, a continuing resolution that is full of pork and full of victories for the Democrats. And why he is doing it, we don't know. I mean, this is a bill that hasn't even gotten to the Senate yet. And of course, the Senate is not yet controlled by Republicans. And the likelihood is it'll get worse in the Senate. But already in the House where we are in control, the bill is apparently an abomination. The president doesn't support it. The Doge folks don't support it. And many Republicans don't support it. Rand Paul had some pretty harsh words, and others have too, about Mike Johnson. Rand Paul called him a weak man. Well, that's pretty. Yeah, he said, I'd hope to see Speaker Johnson grow a spine, but this bill is full of pork and shows that he is a weak man. The debt will continue to grow. Ultimately, the dollar will fail. Democrats are clueless, and big government Republicans are complicit. A sad day for America. And by the way, I think he's expressing the sentiment of a lot of people who just don't understand why Mike Johnson feels the need to cave to these leftists. But he does. And apparently his popularity is continuing to decline. And again, he came in with such fanfare, breath of fresh air, different person from Kevin McCarthy. And now here we are in a situation in which he seems to be perfectly happy to give the Democrats whatever they want. I mean, you know, and I've tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I really have, because he is a fellow Christian. I believe that. And I think he wants to do the right thing. But I'll tell you something, folks. I have learned in my career over the years that just because somebody is a Christian, assuming that they sincerely are believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, does not mean that the character of that person is sufficient in a particular circumstance to do what needs to be done. I ran a radio station for almost 10 years up in Boston, and I'll just be perfectly frank with you. Of course, I always am, but I ended up having to fire people who I believe were Christians and hired people who I believe were not. Now, I know it pains me to even say it. But I found many of the people who, and by the way, not that I didn't have any Christians working for me, because I did, but I found many of the people who claim to be Christians, you know, this old saying, they're so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. They didn't seem to have a grasp of the reality of running a business, of the discipline that it took, of the need to fulfill their responsibilities. They should have been more committed to me as a Christian leader and boss than they might have been in some sort of secular role. But in fact, I saw in many cases where they kind of took advantage of the fact that it was a Christian company. You know, we were running a gospel radio station, took advantage of that fact. I had to let them go. And I ended up hiring people in some of those cases, people who would just do the job. Look, I can't say that I fully understand that. I really don't. I really can't. Because to me, part of being a Christian is having a commitment to excellence, first of all, to adherence to God's word, to excellence in the carrying out of one's duties and responsibilities, okay, to strength and perseverance and commitment and determination to see the fight through, whatever the challenge might be. We don't wilt, we don't fold, we don't quit. Now, to me, that's the way a Christian ought to be. But sadly, that's not the way many are. Many Christians are not that way. And Mike Johnson may be one of them. He may be one of these people, good man, loves God, wants to do the right thing, but doesn't have a backbone. Look, I said this in a speech a long time ago, and I had people repeat it back to me from time to time who heard this speech. There's no such thing as courage without conflict. You can avoid conflict quite easily. All you have to do is become a coward. That's all. You can completely avoid conflict. Every time conflict arises, you just bow down. And you'll avoid all conflict. But if you're going to be what God told Joshua, be strong and very courageous, you're going to face conflict. And when you face conflict, you're going to have to stand on principle rather than bending and folding because you think it's going to somehow benefit you or just make your life easier because you won't have to deal with the conflict or the confrontation. You know, I mentioned this radio station that I ran. I agreed to do that on the basis I was the attorney for the radio station. I took the radio station into bankruptcy as their attorney representing them because they were indeed bankrupt. So I filed the bankrupt paperwork, the bankruptcy paperwork for them and represented them, I think, for about a couple months. And then finally, when there was a plan put in effect to continue to run the radio station under a Chapter 11 reorganization plan, I was approached and asked if I would run the radio station for them, if I would manage it for them. I mean, I guess they'd observed me. They saw that I was competent, capable, and figured, you know, the radio station, by the way, was owned by white owners who were from Maine, but the format of the radio station was a black rhythm and blues radio station. And so they also looked at me as a black man, figuring, well, maybe I can calm some of these, because there were a lot of disgruntled employees who hadn't been paid. It was a mess. Maybe I could deal with all that. And I said I would do it on one condition. I would only run a gospel radio station, a Christian radio station. I said, I'm not interested in rhythm and blues, and I'm not going to be a part of that. And they said, okay. 6 months into it, as a result of pressure from people who were jealous of the fact that I'd gotten control of this radio station, who wanted control of it themselves, under pressure, they came to me and said, well, look, we're not sure that a gospel radio station will work. We want you to continue to run it, but we want you to run it as a rhythm and blues station because we think that's going to be more economically feasible. And, you know, I stopped to think about that, and the Lord arrested me and said, there's nothing to think about. I'm serious, folks. Literally, the Lord. I went to go talk to a mentor of mine about my dilemma, and the Lord said to me, there's nothing to think about, and there's nothing to talk about. Because you said you would only run this as a thing to do, walk away. And I was convicted. I said, Lord, forgive me for even trying to figure out how can I work this? Maybe I can just do gospel. And God said, there's nothing to work out. And I said, Lord, forgive me. Thank you. Boom. I said, I'm not doing it. I'm done. They said, well, sorry about that. Well, we'll find somebody who will. Okay. 6 months later, they came back to me and said, you know what? It was doing much better as a gospel station. Would you come back? Yep. 6 months later, they begged me to come back. So no matter what seems to be the loss in taking a stand for God, the conflict, the confrontation, whatever. And I can tell you some stories about that whole situation that'll make your hair stand up. I'm serious. It got very, very dicey by me taking a stand and others wanting to try to dislodge me as we led up to that point where they were trying to force me to do R&B. There were some people behind that who hated my guts. Threatened me, though. I mean, yeah. But you know, there is no courage without conflict. So I don't know what the future for Mike Johnson is going to look like. I don't know what the future for the House is going to look like. What I do know is that Mike Johnson is going to have to find his courage, or he's going to probably be out as Speaker. When you got Donald Trump saying he is categorically opposed to your bill, you're in a bad place. You are in a bad place. So we'll see where it all goes. But right now, I'll tell you, I am fast surrendering the notion of trying to give Mike Johnson the benefit of the doubt. I'll end with this last thing. A New Jersey mayor believes that these drones might well be searching for radioactive material that went missing from a Newark port. Again, I'll say what many others have said. That's not unique to me. You would tell me that the government doesn't know what this is all about. If anybody believes that, I got a great big old bridge I'll sell you cheap. It's up in Brooklyn. I mean, this is what I really despise about these leftists. They really think that the American people are a bunch of fools. They really do. They are the fools, but they think we are. So yeah, we're fools, we're fascists, and they are the ones who want censorship, who want a lack of transparency, who want control. They're the ones who are lurching towards Sodom. They're the ones who have the totalitarian impulse to control everything and everybody. I don't want that. I mean, the very idea I find abhorrent. After all, I am a son of George Washington, who loved liberty. And I love liberty. Even for the people who don't agree with me, I love liberty. I want them to be free too. I want them to be heard too. I don't agree with them, and I want to be able to make the arguments against them, but I don't want to censor them. I don't want to shut them down. I think their idiocy will prove itself. I think just let them be stupid and talk. And I think that's what happened this last election. The more they talk, the more the American people realize these people are stupid. These people are these people will run this nation off the rails. And we can't give them a chance to do that. Okay, that's going to do it for me today. God bless each and every one of you. I love you. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for our country. I'm praying for this administration. I'm praying for Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and for the House to be able to do its job. Praying that all of this works out. If it requires a government shutdown, so be it. I'd rather see the government shut down than see the government continue to spin us into oblivion. I mean it. I mean it. I think temporary pain is going to be better than a long-term cataclysm. But we'll leave that in the hands of God. I know one thing. I'm opposed to this continuing resolution that they passed. I know that. The 1,600-page behemoth that nobody's really read. You can imagine what would be in it when somebody sits down and goes through it with a fine-tooth comb. Apparently every piece of pork you can imagine has been shoved into the thing. Politicians aren't thinking about it. Many of them. I can't say all, of course. But many of them, they're not thinking about you or me or the American people or our way of life. They're thinking only about themselves and their own power, their own career, their own advancement. That's it. That's all. You and I are nothing but pawns in their game. And we got to put a stop to that. And we got to come back to the notion that we don't work for them, they work for us. That we are their bosses, not the other way around. That the sovereignty of this nation rests in the American people, not in the politicians and the pundits. We made a long way. This last election took us a long way toward that end. But it's clear the work is not yet done. So let's stay at it. Stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side. God bless everybody.